myself, Zakia, will be discussing the privatization of prisons in the U.S. Before we get started, here's a brief outline of what we will be discussing in this presentation. First, we will give a little bit of history on private prisons in the U.S. Then, we will discuss arguments on private prisons. After that, we'll discuss the policy process as outlined by Deborah Stone. Then we will do a walkthrough on Trump's prison policies, and finally conclude and review what we've discussed. The first prison in America was built in 1790 in Philadelphia and was called the Eastern State Penitentiary. 62 years later, in 1852, the first private prison was built. According to the Sentencing Project, from 2000 to 2016, people in private prisons increased by 47%, compared to the overall 9% rise in the prison population. The Sentencing Project also reported that federal governments used private prisons with an increase of 120% by 2016. This made it account for 8.5% of the overall state and federal prison population. So you may be asking yourself, why hire a private prison company? Well, first we have to understand that state prisons are overcrowded and at times unsafe for inmates. So by hiring a private prison, it would alleviate overcrowding in federal and state prisons. Another argument is that it would reduce federal and state financial burdens by allowing private prisons to care for inmates. Another argument is that some facilities offer spiritual components which could have positive effects on inmates. And finally, it would take away the risk from taxpayers and put it on people who are investing or operating these private prisons. So let's discuss some of the arguments against private prisons. Firstly, private prisons are less transparent, and that's because private prisons have less regulations than federal or state prisons. For example, a private prison doesn't have to report where money it receives from the government is actually spent. Another argument is that private prisons are not more cost-effective. Now, while one of the arguments for private prisons is that it would save the government money, the fact is that many studies have shown that this is actually not the case. Finally, private prisons fail to measure up to federal standards in preventing dangerous conditions, intercepting contraband, and ensuring internal accountability for staff misconduct. By using strategies to create more cost-effective prisons for the company, such as paying inmates $1 a day and paying employees such as corrections officers about $23,000 annually, private prisons not only lead to issues in safety, but high turnover rates leading to an unstable environment for both employees and inmates.
It is now important to discuss the present state of private prisons using the 6 steps of the policy process. We must first identify the problem we're trying to solve. As prison costs have increased, both political parties have tried to determine ways to efficiently house prisoners. Recently, President Trump's extreme campaign rhetoric regarding the opioid crisis, immigration, and violent crime brought significant media attention, which placed a spotlight on prisons and helped Trump get elected. To set his agenda, once Trump took office in 2016, he continued to falsely claim rising national crime rates and inefficiently run public prisons to raise public support for increased privatization. In the following years, Trump's approach to illegal immigration would also play a big part in setting his agenda. Where President Trump had tried to eliminate the use of private federal prisons, it is unclear why Trump sought to reverse such policies. Many argue that Trump's policies regarding private prisons were formulated by him and interest groups because of the campaign donations by the companies who run the private prisons. In order to legitimize these policies, the Trump administration has continued to focus on violent crime and rising prison costs to garner support. In 2018, President Trump also increased the arrests of immigrants and separating immigrant children through ICE, which then necessitated the use of private prisons to house the growing number of detained immigrants. President Trump used his immigration policy to help legitimize his private prison policy by indirectly creating a perceived need for more private prisons. Soon after it took office in 2016, the Trump administration began its policy implementation. In early 2017, AG Jeff Sessions formally revoked Obama's initiative to phase out the use of private federal prisons. In April 2017, the Trump administration then posted a notice requesting proposals from private prison companies such as Geo Group, Core Civic, and Management and Training Corp to house prisoners in criminal alien requirement facilities. Finally, in 2018, the Trump administration further implemented its policies by allowing funds to go to private prisons to house undocumented immigrants and their children while they awaited trial or deportation. When evaluating policies behind private prisons, most supporters of private prisons would either state that they are a success or that the results are too early to evaluate. Critics of private prisons, however, continue to claim they are more expensive and less humane. While recidivism rates continue to decline, as they did under Obama, it is difficult to determine whether or not such rates are in any way influenced by the use of private prisons on the federal level. In conclusion, so long as the Trump administration stays in office, it is clear that the private prisons will continue to thrive.